Hello everyone, and welcome back to our Get Started Fast with Avid for Final Cut Pro 7 Editors tutorial series. My name is P McAuliffe, and in this last lesson, we're going to take a look at audio mixing, and I'm going to show you two different techniques to mix audio inside of Media Composer 7, and I'm going to show you a fantastic technique that's going to have you editing music montages in no time flat. Okay, short introduction here. Let's just get into Media Composer 7, and let's get started. Okay, so let's Command and Tab into Media Composer 7, and I have a bin right over here called Appropriately Enough Audio, and inside of here I have 3 music tracks and I have a sample VO. Now before I get in and show you anything as far as audio mixing, I want to call up the tool that we're going to be using primarily to do our mixing. What we're going to do is navigate up to Tools, and I'm simply going to come down to Audio Mixer. Now for me, I actually, because I use it all the time, have this mapped as a shortcut on my keyboard. I have it mapped to F3. So here is the audio mixer. Now why am I calling the audio mixer up right before we even do anything? Well, there's something I want to show you, a great technique that I guarantee you're going to be using all the time, especially when it comes to music. Now in many cases when you import music from a CD, what's going to happen is that music has been normaled to 0, basically meaning that because it's digital, they can have the audio go right up to just below the peaking point where you'd hear distortion. So when you bring it into Media Composer, the audio is going to be exceptionally loud. What's going to happen here is if I bring the audio in here, I'm just going to hit play on the keyboard. And you see it's okay at the beginning, but what's going to happen is once we jump down here, you can see that the audio is exceptionally loud and it's actually peaking. We can see it right over here. And what's going to happen is that's really not that big of a deal. We don't actually hear any distortion, but once we drop it into a timeline, every time we use it, or even every time we use a portion of it, we're going to have to get into the audio mixer and keep bringing that audio down. I don't really want to do that. I'd rather just set that audio right when I import it and forget it. Well, that's actually very easy to do. All I need to do is with the audio here in the preview window and I have it selected, I can simply come over here to the audio mixer and I can set the audio to be -10. Now what most people do is they just come in and punch in -10 and they say, okay, well that's on the left channel, I'm just going to take this on the right channel and do -10 as well. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to shorten that process up a little bit. I'm just going to come back here, we'll just set this back to 0, we'll set this one back to 0, because we're going to use the group feature. Now you might actually hear me refer to this as gang, because that's how it used to be referred to as in previous versions of Media Composer. It's actually called group now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to group these two channels together, and I'm just simply going to come down to one channel and set them to -10, and you'll see that it does the same for every channel that's grouped together. Now if I come back, what I'm also going to do here is instead of using the VU meters here, I'm just going to open the audio tool by simply hitting Command and 1 on the Mac, Control and 1 on Windows. We'll just stick it right down here beside the audio mixer. Why not? Just to sort of keep everything nice and organized. And now I'm just simply going to hit play, and you'll see that that audio is now peaking probably at about -10 as opposed to being peaking up here right at 0. And the great thing is that if I was to come in, let's just take a little bit of this here. We'll just take, yeah, sure, why not? Just about that, we'll drop it in. And we'll just take a different section of it here, drop it in. Again, take a different section, drop it in. You'll see that if I select the first clip here, -10. Second clip, -10. Third clip, -10. So you can see this is really a fantastic, great little tip that you can use, especially if you do a lot of music sampling or sound effects work. This really is something you're going to use all the time, so you're not constantly going back into your timeline and lowering audio levels. You can just really set them when you import them and forget about them. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to do a basic audio mix. Now I'm going to show you the first of 2 techniques, and believe it or not, this is a technique that I actually use all the time, and most people think it would be the audio keyframing like you saw in the previous tutorial, but it's actually not, and you're going to see why I don't do this in just a second. What we're going to do is we're just going to remove all this from my timeline, and I actually have a voiceover clip right here. I'm just going to call it up here, we'll just play it. This is some very cool motocross footage that we have in our timeline. Now obviously we don't have any motocross footage, but I just needed a voiceover to record just for the purposes of doing this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, let's actually take the 30-second version of this piece of music, and of course again we're going to do exactly what we did before. We're just going to call up the audio mixer, we're just going to set our audio here to be -10. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the entire clip and I'm just going to drop it into my timeline. I'm going to create some new audio tracks by simply hitting Command and U on the Mac, Control and U on Windows. Let's just drop them in like such. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off both those tracks, and we're just going to move down my audio here. There we go. And let's take our voiceover. Now I'm just going to take my voiceover here. I'm just going to take the entire clip and we're just going to drop it into channel 1. Maybe I'll just place it right about here. Okay, perfect. Now what we have right now, if I hit play, we have some loud music playing. And what's going to happen is my voiceover is going to get buried under it. This is some very cool motocross footage that we have in our timeline. Now what we actually want to have happen is we want to first of all have our audio to be center panned, not only on the left channel, and we want to have our music dip down once it gets to the voiceover. So let's do first things first here. Let's, sort of do things in logical fashion. What I'm going to do is head right back on over to the audio clip. Now what's important to keep in mind is that you can't actually alter any audio inside the audio mixer unless the time bar is over top of it. You'll see if I jump down right here, I don't have access to it now, but as soon as I click on over top of it, I do. Now something else that I want to point out before I move on, and I just want to talk a little bit about how I have my audio configured in my timelines. I may have mentioned this in the previous tutorial, but I think it's something that's very important for me to mention again. In most cases when I do my audio mixing, I have my voiceover / narration on channels 1 and 2. I have my on-camera dialogue on 3 and 4, my sound effects on 5 and 6, and my music on 7 and 8. Now obviously depending on how things go, I might need a few more channels or a few less channels, but in most cases that's the audio configuration that I have laid out. Now most people think, Kev, I would never do that. Well, why would I do something like that? I'm going to do it my own way. Well, I'm going to tell you exactly why I do things that way. The reason that I do things that way is because in a lot of cases, being a senior editor, I'll get a call at home, at all hours of the day and night, with another editor saying to me, Kev, I really can't find the music in piece XYZ that you edited. And I can say, oh, okay, well what's the scene that it's in? They'll tell me the scene and I'll know roughly where that is, and I can say, you know what, that's about 20 minutes into the timeline. Oh, and it's the music you want? That'll be on channels 7 and 8. So you see right there, just the fact that I keep it nice and organized means that I can find things even when I'm not sitting in front of the editing station. So I just wanted to point that out before I move on and we just sort of configure our timeline here. Okay, now let's talk about monoing this channel. What we need to do to mono this channel is very simple. With our time bar over top of our voice track, all I'm going to do, simply navigate over here to the audio mixer. We're going to come right over here to our pan tool, and I'm simply going to hold Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows, and I'm just going to click on the panner that was set to the left, and it's immediately going to swing it right around to the mid. All I'm going to do now is simply come back and hit play, and here we go. This is some very cool nice and centered, but of course still buried in that music. Okay, so what would I do now if I don't use the keyframing method? Well, here's what I like to do. What I like to do is I like to come back. Now I have a function set up on my keyboard, a shortcut. I have F6 mapped to be add edit. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to activate channels 3 and 4. I'm just going to disable channels 1 and 2 right now. And with F6 on the keyboard ready to be selected, all I'm going to do is I'm going to add an edit right here, and I'm going to add an edit right about there. Now I'm going to come back to this middle clip here because you'll see we now have obviously 3 clips. Even though technically they're the same clip, they're joined by through edits. What I'm going to do is with this middle clip selected, we're going to come back to the audio mixer. I'm just going to stretch the audio mixer out a little bit here. And I'm going to take channels 3 and 4 and we're going to bring them down. I'm just going to turn my grouping on 3 and 4 and turn it off on 1 and 2. We're going to bring that audio down to be about -18, I think. So now you'll see that if I come back to the first clip, we're at -10. This middle clip, or the through edit here, we're at -18, and then we're back up to -10 again. Well, now all I really need to do is mark an in point, mark an out point. I can simply hit dissolve on the keyboard, and we'll just, sure, why don't we just use a 24 frame dissolve? I'm going to apply it to all transitions in to out. I'm simply going to say add, and guess what we now have? I'm going to hit play, and here comes our dip in the audio. This is some very cool motocross footage that we have in our timeline. And of course our music comes back up at the end. Now most people think, Kev, why would you ever edit like that? That seems to be a very basic, rudimentary way to do things. Well, I'll tell you exactly why I like to do things like this. What's important to keep in mind is that, especially if you work at a facility that has many different editors at many different skill levels, some editors might not be comfortable using the keyframe method to do their audio mixing. Well, working this way is a very visual way for an editor to come in and sit down and figure out exactly what is going on with an audio mix. This is something I used to do basically starting about 15 to 16 years ago when I was working on Media Composer. Sometimes, depending on the project that I'm working on, I'll switch over to the keyframing method, but in many cases I stick with editing my audio like this because, like I said, it's a very visual way for an editor at any skill level to see exactly what is going on with the audio in my timeline. They can take a look here and pretty much figure out that I've actually done an audio dip right here and brought it back up to be the normal levels right after the voiceover. So you see, not only a very effective way to do an audio mix, but also a very visual way to help out everybody that's working on a production, no matter what their skill level. Okay, so now let's talk about the keyframe method of audio mixing. Now we talked about this a little bit in the previous lesson, but we're going to expand on it right now. Okay, so first of all, we talked a little bit about the views in our timeline in the previous lesson. And you'll remember that I set a view for my audio mixing. Now the only problem with that was when I set it, I only actually adjusted channels 3 and 4, and I left 1 and 2 the way it was. But ideally, if I was going to do this, I'd want to make sure that I had all 8 channels visible before I set this view up. So how do I get in and remove this audio mixing view? Well, let's actually just switch back to normal for one quick second. What we're going to do is we're going to navigate over here to our settings tab. I'm just going to pull the project window right down, and inside of the settings view, what we want to do is we want to come all the way down to the bottom here to our timeline section. You'll see in the timeline section we have our view of audio mixing and our view of quote-unquote normal. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select that audio mixing view, and we're just simply going to delete it. Now you'll see if I come back down to the bottom, the normal view is now the only view that I have. And if I wanted to get in and select all 4 channels, or what I could do is I could actually add 8 channels. Why don't we just do that? I'm going to add 8 channels here. And you'll see why I'm going to do this in just a second. And what we're going to do again, Command and L on the keyboard on the Mac, Control and L on Windows. And I'm not going to bring it up too much, only because obviously I'm working on a single screen environment. If you're working on a 2-screen environment, it's not that bad, but real estate is something that I don't really have a lot of. So why don't we just sort of expand things out to right there. And I'm just going to save this back as audio mixing. Okay, now what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this sequence here. Let's come back into my audio here. Let's just delete this sequence. I'm just going to set everything up exactly as I had done before. What we're going to do is we're going to switch our view back to being normal. Let's take our sample VO again, T on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows. We're just going to drop it in here. Now I don't need 2 channels, I only actually need 1. So we'll just drop it in like such. We'll just add a few more channels. Let's just add, I don't know, let's add 5 channels just for the sake of what we're doing. Again, I'm going to take the 30-second music track. We're going to come down to channels 3 and 4. Just drop that in. There we go. I'm just going to take the sample VO. Let's just slide it down to about, sure, there, why not? Now, the reason I added 5 audio channels was just so that you could see, because it's no fluke. If I come right back down here to the normal view, we switch that to audio mixing, you'll see that, of course, all 5 channels are now set up exactly the way that they were. If I add a few more channels here, there's 6, there's 7, there's 8, but of course, if I add that channel 9, it's not going to be the same size. So that's obviously something to keep in mind. When you're setting up your views, you're going to want to make sure that you set the view for as many audio channels as you're going to be working in. But I'm just going to undo what I just did just to get me back here. Let's actually delete channel 5 because I'm not going to need it here. There we go. Very nice. Okay, so let's now talk about mixing using the keyframe method. Now I think also for the purposes of what we're doing, I'm going to delete audio channel 2, and I'm just going to delete the video because we don't need it. I think what I'll do, even though I'm not going to save the view, we're just going to expand out the channels that we have here. Now, of course, I have audio 1 and 2 here, which I don't need. Once I clear the monitor, you'll see that we now have only the 3 channels that we need to work with to do our little mix. Now, let's do our mix. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate right down here to the bottom. I'm going to come to the fast menu. We're going to click on it. I'm going to navigate up to audio data, and what I want to do is I'm going to come right over here and I'm going to turn on volume. Now, as soon as I do, you're going to see that I now have the reference for 0, +3, +6, +9, +12, and then we have our -3, -7, 11, 15, etc., etc. Now, one thing I can also do if I want to is I can navigate right back down here, because some people like to see the waveform data as well. You'll see there's the waveform data for the audio. You see for the audio, because everything came in at 0 and everything sort of pretty much peaked right up at 0, we don't really get too much of a waveform, but you'll see that for my voiceover, we actually get a very detailed waveform, so I can actually see where the breaks in my voice is. So if I wanted to get in and alter that slightly, maybe cut that breath out, bring everything back a little bit, it's very simple to do with the waveform view. Now, for the purposes of what we're doing, I'm just going to shut that off. I actually, believe it or not, have that set to be a shortcut on the command palette right up here. So at any time I need it, I can just simply click on it. Some people prefer to have it as a keyboard shortcut, but for me, having it on the composer window I think is good enough. So again, audio data, let's just turn the waveform off here. And what we're going to do now is simply use our shortcut for adding a keyframe, which is the apostrophe key or the quotes button on the keyboard. And you'll see there is a keyframe added in to my audio track. Now I'm just going to undo that because I want to get a little bit closer to the sample VO here. So let's add that back in right there. And what we're going to do is just navigate right down to about here, and we're just going to add another one right there. Boom. What we're going to do now is simply come up, grab that audio keyframe. What we want to do is with the first one selected on channel 3, I'm just going to hold shift to select it on channel 4, and now you'll see that I can actually take that keyframe or keyframes and I can adjust them to be whatever level I want. Now the question is, what exactly am I adjusting them to? Well, if you'll take a look right down here where we'd actually told Media Composer what timeline view we wanted, as I adjust these keyframes, you'll see it's now telling us exactly how many dB we're adjusting these keyframes by. Now it's also important to keep in mind, I'm just going to undo what I just did just to put everything back up here at 0, there we go, is that we'd already adjusted our audio here to be -10. So if you wanted to be completely accurate, what you would do is you'd actually set this back to be 0 so that when you're adjusting your audio by, let's say, -10, you're actually going to be -10 dB lower than where you started. Right now, if I make, let's just say I make a, we'll just come down to roughly about -7 here. So there's a -7 dB adjustment. Well, what's important to keep in mind is that we're actually not at -7 anymore. We're actually at -17 because remember, we made the adjustment here down to -10. We've now taken this and brought it down to -17. So obviously keep that in mind. Now something else that's very cool is that if you hold Command on the Mac, Control on Windows, you can actually adjust your keyframes incrementally by the volume that's over here, right? You'll see on the left hand side we've got 0, -3, -7, -11. If I hold Command on the keyboard on the Mac, Control on Windows, we can adjust it down to, in this case we're at -3 to -7 to -11 to -15, etc. And of course going above 0 as well. Now you know what? I just realized something. That I've come in, I've set these keyframes, I'm ready to make an adjustment, but I just realized that the audio actually, it needs to sort of fade out a little bit longer. So what do I do to adjust these down the timeline? Because I can't grab them and just pull them down the timeline. Well, all we're going to do is we're simply going to hold Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows, and you'll see now that we can slide these keyframes down the timeline to wherever we might need them to be. There we go. And there's the adjustment so that it's a much longer fade to dip the audio. What I'm going to do is just undo that because of course I'm pretty happy with the way that this looks now. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down. We need to bring this down to be something pretty noticeable. Let's bring it down to, I don't know, sure, -9.2, why not? So to do our fade back up in the music, all I'm going to do again is add another keyframe right there. I'm going to come to about here again. Again, I'm going to hold Shift to select both these keyframes. Let's just hold, again, Command on the keyboard to snap to these points because we want to bring everything back up to 0 just like that. And what we've now done is a basic mix. Here we go. This is some very cool motocross. Now, of course, I didn't mono my in our timeline sample VO, but that's no problem. Again, we just come back right here. I can simply take this, hit 0 on the keyboard, and now we're all set to go. This is some very cool motocross footage that we have in our timeline. Okay, so you know what? Hypothetically, we've got a 2-hour long show, we've done our mix, everything's fantastic, and then the producer comes in and takes a listen and says, you know what? Everything is 5 dB too hot. You need to get in, you need to adjust that. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, oh no, I got to go back and either have to mix everything down and bring that down -5 dB, or I have to go in and I have to adjust everything. Oh no, what am I going to do? It's Friday at 5 o'clock. You know what? Don't worry. Inside of Media Composer 7, we have a great fallback in situations like that to really get you out of a jam. And it's very simple. You're going to see over here in the audio mixer, not only do we have access to the individual audio channels, but we also have access to a master mixer. So for example, if the producer said I needed to bring this down by 5 dB across the entire board, all I need to do is simply come to my master fader, punch in -5, and it's going to bring everything down universally -5 dB, something that's very handy to get you out of a jam, especially on those Friday afternoons when you have your back against a deadline. Okay, so I did promise you at the start of this tutorial a very cool trick that you're going to be able to use to really amaze the clients that are sitting with you, especially when it comes to editing music montages. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I need to get rid of this sequence. We're just going to create a new sequence. We're just going to use some music in here. Let's take our, sure, let's just take the full track. Why not? I'm going to hit T on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows. Of course, you'll remember, because we set the audio to -10, Media Composer is going to remember that. Let's just take this clip, drop it into a new timeline. And I don't need my audio mixing view. I'm just going to switch back to a normal view here now. Now you remember I also mentioned earlier that I have F6 on my keyboard mapped to be Add Edit. What we're going to do is we're going to deselect the audio tracks. Now one thing that's always a problem with music montage is I'm just going to zoom in on my timeline here, Command and M on the Mac, Control and M on Windows, and I can select a region to zoom in on. So I'm just going to zoom in on about this 15-second long piece right here. Now in most cases this is the way I see people edit music montages. What they do is they're going to mark an endpoint right at the beginning and they're going to hit play. And what they're going to do is, right about there, they're going to say, okay, this is where my first clip's going to go. And then they're going to go and find a clip and drop it in. Then they're going to go, okay, let's play this. Okay, maybe about there. And then they're going to take another clip, they're going to drop it in, etc., etc. Now, of course, this makes the process of cutting a music montage to be an unbelievably painful process that I see editors taking hours and hours and hours to do when it really should not take you any longer than absolutely necessary to do this. The fun part of doing the montage is actually picking the shots to make it work. The hard part is actually getting all the edits just right. Or is it? Let me show you how I cut music montages. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom back and see my entire timeline. What I'm going to do is with my finger on F6 on the keyboard, I'm going to make sure with video channel 1 selected, all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the space bar to start playing, and when I get to all the points where I want edits to happen, I'm simply going to hit Add Edit. Watch what I mean. Here we go, ready? Okay, there we go, I just hit it again and right there again. Okay. And once we get into the real beat, that's where really, this is really gonna sort of show you how things work. Here we go, ready? And let's go. Boom, 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 boom. Edit. Edit. You sort of see how I'm going with this, okay? What's going to happen is when I sit through basically the entire 2.5 minutes of this song and I hit stop on the keyboard, take a look at what I have now. If you take a look at my timeline, what I've basically done is I've edited a music montage without a single frame of video being in there. So now really, if you were to go and take a look at this and play this back, you'd see that all of my edits, well pretty much most of my edits, only because I sort of did this all in one shot, but pretty much about 95% of my edits happen on the beat. Now obviously I could get in and make any minor adjustments I want, but guess what? You could conceivably sit down at a piece of music that's 2 minutes long, hit play on the keyboard, and use the Add Edit command to basically cut that montage without a single frame of video. And now all you have to do is basically just go back and drop in whatever video clip you want into each of these edits. And as soon as you get to that very last edit and drop that clip in, your montage is really going to be done. No adjustments need to be made, and I guarantee you, you're going to cut the amount of time that it takes to cut a music montage by about 80% using this technique, and it's something that's so simple to do inside of Media Composer 7. So if you want to get post-production workflow tutorials and industry insight you need to bring great stories to life, head on over and check us out at avidblogs.com/post.